Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the Temple Health and Bioscience District's June Lunch and Learn webinar. We really appreciate everybody who's joined us here in person, online, or on the phone. We're so excited today to have Anita Leffel here to talk about business pitching through storytelling. So thank you so much, Anita, for joining us. We can't wait to hear your presentation. Before we get started, I just want to address a couple of quick things. If anybody asks questions at any time throughout the presentation, you should have a little questions tab over on your control panel. So feel free to drop any questions over there at any time, and we will get to all those questions at the very end so that Anita can answer them for you. And finally, we will be emailing out a copy of her presentation that she'll give today. So if you miss anything while you're taking notes, don't worry, we'll be mailing that out, and we'll have a recording up on our YouTube channel eventually too, so don't worry. With that being said, I'm going to give a quick introduction of Anita, and I'll let you go into your background a little bit more too. But Anita is a business owner, a former university professor and dean, and she's received awards in teaching excellence for her 15 plus years of teaching entrepreneurship. She's taught and mentored hundreds of entrepreneurs in universities, at invited workshops, online courses, and face-to-face. So we're really excited to have her here to speak with us today. She worked in nonprofit, for-profit, and government entities before moving to academia. So she's got a really great background. And with that being said, Anita, I'll let you talk a little bit more about yourself and go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you. And I really am excited to be here this afternoon. For me, it's still morning. I'm on the West Coast. But I'm excited to talk about this issue because of a number of reasons. Most, I guess, clearly in our minds right now is what's gone on in Silicon Valley. It's from a woman who started a large business, and through her stories, it turned into being a fraud. And so I think it's real important that we talk about stories, the power of stories, and how you turn that and put that into a pitch. And as Kelsey said, for nearly 15 years, I watched many entrepreneurs pitch their ideas and to all kinds of audiences, investors, and through business plan competitions and other kinds of contests. And I've also sat through listening to those pitches to each other, to our colleagues for selling our ideas. Each audience has another expectation from the speaker. And if you think about it, you're not going to say the same thing at an investor meeting that you would be saying to a group of individuals who have no business or financial ties. So what you as a speaker need to understand is who you are. Why am I giving this pitch? What do I want? Do I want money? Do I want connections? Do I want approval? And how you frame your message then depends upon who you're speaking to. The number one mistake that I've seen over and over is that the speaker did not understand the audience, and they did not understand what they expected from the audience. And if you think about that, you know, what is it truly you want from that audience? But number two, I've noticed that the common denominator in all of the pitches is how they present it through a story. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So there we go. I want to start with this story. This is an example of a really great story. This woman, Subhi Sarna, founded a company, Envision, right out of college in 2009, and it was a test for ovarian cancer. She was, of course, a college student. She didn't have any connections. She didn't have any money, and she had to continue to work day jobs just to keep going. And she went around doing fundraising, and it all fell on deaf ears. She says, I've been in several boardrooms with all male VCs who are like, oh, this is a woman's issue. So one day she went to her mentor and was showing her frustration. And through their discussion, it came out that in fact she had had her own personal scare at the age of 13 when doctors thought that she had ovarian cancer. Fortunately, it wasn't true, but that scare really impacted her life. Up until that time that she had been doing all of this fundraising and not sharing that story, she had not bothered to share it because she told her mentor, because I just didn't think that anybody would want to, to know this story. Well, he encouraged her to, and once she did, it was almost like overnight the money opened up. And now, as you can see by this article, which was just recently, by the way, she's selling her company for $250 million. But what was the difference? The difference really was, and people will tell you this, that she brought in her personal story into her pitch. She made it real to the people that she was pitching to. So if we want to learn something about stories, we got to first kind of step back and say, okay, what is a story? And so who do we turn to but Disney? They tell the best stories. They are very successful at that. So a film maker named Andrew Stanton. He's on TED Talk, and if you want to check him out, I think the name of his TED Talk is The Clues to a Great Story. He shares what he knows about storytelling, and at the end, he says, I work from the end, working back to the beginning. That's how I start with my story. And he says, we all love stories. We're born for them. And I'm going to quote him, stories affirm who we are. We all want affirmations that our lives have meaning. And nothing does a greater affirmation than when we connect through stories. And he goes on in his talk to say, in the short term, have you made me want to know what will happen next? But more importantly, have you made me know how it will conclude, or want to know how it will conclude in the long term? Let's skip over now and talk about this this book, Made to Stick. It's a great book. I really recommend it. And in the book, it was written by Chip Heath and Dan Heath brothers. And in the book, they quote Martin Luther King. Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said, "A lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can even get its boots on." And I think we're seeing that in today's political arena. But his observations, this quote of how lies are just can carry on far better and stronger than the truth sometimes. That legends and the conspiracy theories and all these bogus news stories, they circulate effortlessly. So in the meantime, people are that really have a message of these, entrepreneurs and teachers and politicians and journalists, anyone who really has an important message, they struggle to make their idea stick. And so the Heath brothers come up with about 6 or so similar traits that you can think about and incorporate if you yourself are in a situation where you want to share an idea. They say keep it simple, make it concrete, and the most important here that we're going to be talking about is build in emotion if it's appropriate, and do something unexpected but be credible. Keeping in mind that the more absorbed you are in a story as a listener, the more you are changed and affected by this. So storytelling is knowing that everything you're saying from the first sentence to the last is leading to a singular goal. And ideally, you're confirming some truth that deepens our understandings. So we all love stories. Nothing does a greater affirmation than when we connect through stories, just like Stanton said. The elements you provide and the order you place your information in is very, very crucial. You have to learn to be a good storyteller, and that takes practice. So let's turn and look at a few more understanding ideas regarding stories and storytelling. And I hope that most of you are familiar with TED.com. TED is a nonprofit group organization devoted to ideas, and they are simply presented in videos or through talks about 18 minutes or less, no longer than 18 minutes. And they started in 84, and they talk about science and business and all kinds of issues. And obviously they're very successful. It's been translated into 100 languages. But the curator, TED, Chris Anderson, whom you see in this picture here, he shared with an audience on TED about TED Talks. And basically what he says is the #1 task as a speaker is to transfer into your listeners' minds an extraordinary gift, a strange and beautiful object that we call an idea. I encourage you to listen to his talk, and he's just a phenomenal speaker on his own. What is an idea? An idea is a pattern of information that may help you understand and navigate the world. So if you think about that pattern of information, you think about when you're putting together a pitch or a presentation. Now, I'm going to be talking about pitches, not presentations. And I'm talking about pitches because this is geared towards you wanting to pitch a business idea, and you want others to accept it. So from the moment that you open your mouth and you set a promise that this story that you're going to tell will lead somewhere to it, for someone to be worthy of listening to what you have to say, they are going to be critical of, obviously, and they want you to prove that you are someone that they should be listening to. So your task is to transfer an idea into the minds of the listeners who perhaps hold the key to your future. Now, I think what's interesting is that in my years before going into academia, I worked at D. Anderson Hospital in Houston as a media production, media director. And I sat through many presentations by physicians. And I think they were called, I forgot. Anyway, they were very dry talks and very boring. And it's because there was no story. And if you think about it, when you see something like in the screen here, if you see something factual, very dry, your instinct is sort of to be ready to challenge it. You know, it's like putting up your dukes. We're critical, we're skeptical, and we want to challenge things. If there's no emotion involved, then we are strictly, replying in sort of a logical way. We wanted to challenge what we're seeing. But the new gospel in business storytelling, and over the last, I would say, 8 years, I was in charge of Toastmasters at UTSA when I was teaching at UTSA, and there was no talk of storytelling at the time. We were just teaching and talking about Toastmasters. But storytelling really picked up, and it's now become a new gospel of business story, of telling your story in a business setting by using stories. And if you think about it, we as humans, we argue that the difference between us and other species is that we have wisdom and we have intelligence and we have logic. And if you think about it, then if you are just giving a very dispassionate presentation with costs and benefits, we really are supporting that viewpoint that we are wise and intelligent and logical in our thinking. But we are beasts of emotion more than logic, and we are creatures of stories. And the process of changing one's mind must begin with something similar to once upon a time. So it's been proven psychologically that stories activate a different part of the brain. And so if you're telling a story and it activates part of the same part of the brain that your listener is hearing this story, think about that. That's very powerful. You really are talking very specifically, everyone has this desire, this passion for story, and so you're reaching to them through a story. So in business, storytelling is, it's the rage. You can't turn to any learning about pitching and not hear about telling your story. And without telling a compelling story, it's like whatever your it's dead on arrival. In this book, Tell to Win by Peter Guber, I recommend this. He joins and talks with other writers who evangelize the power of story, and in using story in particular in business settings. Guber argues that humans simply aren't moved to action through data or PowerPoint slides or spreadsheets. People are moved by emotion, and the best way to connect is through Once Upon a Time. So I will take a second at this very moment, because the other part of that slide is the Trojan horse. And so I want to digress for a moment and talk about this elephant in the room. There's a new book called Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. I downloaded it a few days ago, and I've already finished it because I really wanted to understand what was behind this woman's approach to business, and what was it that made her so successful and tell such big lies. And so I found this article that was written. The title of the article is 3 Lessons Investors Can Learn from Theranos Implosion. So this is an investor talking to an investor. And he says, as human beings, we've created some amazing tools. We've landed on the moon. We've mapped the human genome. But in terms of manipulating behavior, actions, and beliefs, the most powerful tool at our disposal is also the oldest. A really good story. So if you think about it, Elizabeth Holmes shared early on that she had this huge fear of needles and this deep desire to help the world. And she told this story in that she wanted to be someone that could help science predict future health problems and save all kinds of lives with such a fraction of the cost that it is today. She became like a sign that women can succeed in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure that you've been following that as well, that how women are not as successful, more and more that's changing, but are not as successful as men. And she became an inspiration to young girls. And what is it about that? And that is because she learned early how to tell a story. In this article, one last thing, and that is that Peter Lynch, who is a really big investor, he said he believed that if you couldn't explain how a company works to a child with just a crayon and a piece of paper, you probably shouldn't be investing in it. All the investors just could not tell the story the way Elizabeth could. They really didn't understand the whole setting, the whole thing. And so if you think about it, investors are telling investors, you invest in what you know. And if you don't understand what you're investing in such a way that you could explain it to an 8-year-old, then you have no business being in that market. And I turn that around and I say, but by the way, as a speaker, if you can't explain it in such a way that an 8-year-old would not understand it, or that your grandmother, let's just say your grandmother, and I used to say that in class all the time, if you tell your grandmother this story and if she can't repeat it back to you, then you haven't told a good story. You haven't told enough about your business. But back to Tell to Win. In Tell to Win, in this book, he does mention the Trojan horse, and the Trojan horse, the story, of the ancient Greeks and the Trojan, and how the Greeks fooled everyone, stuffed that horse with they're warriors, and the Trojans open the door, let them all in, and you know the end of the story. So Goober says that stories are also Trojan horses. The audience accepts a story because it's a good story, and we all want good stories, right? But the story is actually just a delivery system for the teller's agenda. A story can be a trick. And so it is a powerful way, it's a powerful, powerful tool that can be used for both good and ill and bad. And so the takeaway to me is that um, what you need to do constantly is bring the customer into your presentation. It is your story and that customer's story that brings your ideas to life. Um, if you understand the problem and you're fighting to solve the problem, uh, or you know someone who is solving, someone who does have this problem, be sure and bring that in. Have them part of your story. I've always told my students, put on a show. You're in charge of the stage as much as possible. So you need to share your story. You need to know your audience. You need to rehearse. You need to prepare for the questions and what answers, and you need to show your passion. But remember that you have this ability to control the audience if you truly understand that, and you do that in a positive way. So in a sort of a typical, those of you, and I assume that most of you are in biotech, bioscience. If you have given scientific presentations, on the left, you can see that, you're just giving your title, give some background, you give the results, the data, and future directions. And then, by the way, you acknowledge your team. But if you look on the right-hand side, there's a lot more that goes into giving a pitch to an investor and including what we're calling the story. All business pitches, even though a biotech pitch is different from, say, an IT pitch. You can go online, Google IT pitches, and you can find hundreds of them. It's very rare that you can find a really good biotech pitch. Although right now I think that's changing as well. That you can probably Google that and find some good pitches. But without giving you an example, I can just say that all business pitches do have something universal and something in common with each other, and that is the way you tell your story. And so that's kind of where I am as far as telling you how to design your pitch. And in a few minutes, I will go over some of the topics to include, not as a template, just as topics to include. But I'm trying to make this fact to you that point out this important component of what stories mean to you. So what is different about the bioscience and biotech presentations is, there are a lot of, this longer development time and the regulations and the skill sets that are involved. But there are a couple of things that you can impress upon, and one of them is that as a biotech presentation, as a scientist, you are presenting something that has a social significance and actually quite an extensive grand return on investment to investors. And so that is a point that you want to keep in mind as you're designing your own pitches. But I really want to impress upon you that there are certain things, whether it's your pitch or someone else's, that has nothing to do with life science, that there are certain topics and certain key points to keep in mind that are universal across them all. And that is the sort of the structure of of storytelling. So there you can consider it like two parts. There's the story, and then there's the storytelling. But in the story, if you look at any of the stories that we like, there's a character, there's characters, and you know clearly, and you're following the character all the way through the story, and there's a motivation for something. There's this plot that the characters have to get through, and then there's some symbols and things that help the story connect through the entire story. Well, if you translate that into a business pitch, then what you're talking about is that the characters are your customers. That has to be throughout your pitch. There's insights, there's problems with your solution. And so, some people says, well, there's no story behind, the science of what I'm doing. Well, that's not true. There is a story, and it starts with the customer and the customer's problem. So if the story is the customer, then the narration has to include the problem and the solution. And telling the story is the focus, using your visuals and the narrative. But you also have to bring in your experience and the experience that the customer is going through. And so, if we say that stories need characters, then we say products need customers, right? So customers make you smarter. They are the center of your narrative. They are the story. They are the reason that you're here today. So the problem, the challenges is that oftentimes I've heard pitches where the product is really cool, but there's really no customer base. Now, this should all be discovered prior to giving a pitch, but sometimes that's what comes out. Perhaps it's just the way it's been told that we don't see what the problem is. Of course, there could be that you've got great insight on a customer, but you just haven't been able to identify a definite, clear problem of how somebody, you, the scientist, or you, the business person, can fix that. And so again, it's like you've got to be sure that everything that you're telling in your story connects from the beginning until the end with your customer, with your problem. Everything has to lead towards something. And that's the issue that I often found, is that they were jumbled up. They were bringing up information that was not important. It was not relevant to the story. Or they were talking about a whole customer base that has nothing to do with the target customer that you're talking about. So let's go through, and I think I'm hope that you are following along with this concept of bringing story into your pitches. So I'm going to show you that this is not a template, and I encourage you, do not use this as a template, but do use this as the topics that somehow, somewhere, you're going to include in your pitch. So I'll go through, there's about 15 points or something like that I'll bring up that I think is relevant to your story, your pitch. So be sure and describe the focus of your company, mission, and if there's relevant history, share that. Tell where the technology came from, especially if it comes from a very renowned institution or a renowned scientist. Describe this current stage of the development of your business. Talk about the talk about the problem, but turn it into a real pain that the investors can feel. They are the characters that you want your investor to understand. And you're solving a person's problem, a person's pain, because they have this problem, and you want the investor to understand that. Explain why this is why there is this problem and what the current status is. You have to help investors understand what the problem is, who's suffering it, who's dealing with this, and all the issues that someone has to deal with in terms of solving their own pain, like limitations and costs and inconveniences and all these kind of things. Talk about the technology and the problem solution. And you don't have to do that by giving away everything, but you do have to be sure and share enough so that someone understands that what your product can do. Remember, the investor has to understand and be able to clearly get a grasp of what it is that you're trying to do, and that they can be part of that. You can certainly show data and results and all these things, but you're going to be careful about how you do that and how you present that. You demonstrate to the audience that everything that you're presenting has something to do with this story that you're telling. Don't bring in extemporaneous or any insignificant types of information. Keep it very, very focused. And you do want to mention competition and any kind of substitutes. I used to have students that say, well, my competition, there is no competition because there's nothing like this. Well, I have to beg to differ. The fact that there is nothing is also a competitive aspect that you have to deal with. You have to then educate the customer on why they need this. So you always there are competitions, and that you want to list any products that are similar, or any issues that are going on that are similar in your realm. Describe what might be coming up in the future, and maybe talk about the willingness of users to change, that that they are looking for a difference. Elaborate as best that you can on what makes you different from what's going on currently. And talk about the market opportunity and strategy a bit. And again, you don't say everybody is my market. You be very specific, and you learn how to tell, and you learn how to describe that target market and who's your secondary market. You want to use details about the whole sector and about the disease. But again, you want to limit that market size because you're not going to reach everyone. So you've got to work on, that's a very important component, is working on explaining to your investors who your market is. And finally, in this section, you want to talk about business and the revenue model. You want to show how you're going to make money. You want to describe any partnerships, and you want to talk about maybe distribution channels. Reimbursement strategy is very unique and to different aspects of science. And I've seen a lot that let's say that we've got actually 3 different unique customers. You have a patient who might use the product, and you have someone who's paying for it or prescribing, let's say someone who's prescribing it, which is the physician, and then you have someone else who might be paying for it. All of these are unique customers, and all of them must be included somehow and demonstrated somehow that you've considered that in your reimbursement strategy. You want to show proof. You want to describe some pricing models. Maybe you're getting this pricing from somewhere else. Where are you getting it from? You want to show that that you understand the reimbursement process of your product. Product development and regulatory pathway. Describe all of that. Describe where you are in the own development of your product and where you are to date. List milestones and give some estimates of time frame. Talk about the potential follow-up products that could support the technology that you're coming up with. Intellectual property and secret sauce. Now, we put down secret sauce because there is secret sauce in every product. Doesn't mean that you have to give that if you're not in the stage of due diligence. You do not have to share confidential information, but you do need to share enough information so investors understand and appreciate what it is that you're working on. Leadership team. I think the best way to describe this is to say investors do not write checks to the product. They write them to people, to the teams. And so you've got to show that you've got a great senior management team that has relevant experience. You want to talk about their advisors, background of consultants or board members, anyone that is affiliated or associated that can lend credibility. This is the time to bring that up. And describe any key partnerships that you might be working on that will support your product. And estimated exit. Sometimes, you know, the IT products that I've worked with other individuals, they're not talking about an exit strategy. You know you are, because this is a product that has to get out and it requires some kind of exit strategy. So you need to show that you have thought about this. VCs certainly want to know it, but also angel investors, you know, your first seed rounds, they want to hear, what are you thinking about? How far is this going to go? Where is it going to go? Share data on exit valuations and revenues, and you can get all that. It's easy. Look at what others similar have done, and who has what kind of exit strategies they have used, and you know, copy it. Use that model for what it is that you're working on and what you're trying to do. But don't be unrealistic. You've got to, you know, I think that investors think, and one point in the book about Theranos is that she often said, "Oh, people were challenging her on exaggeration," and she was saying, "Oh, investors expect us to exaggerate in our investment pitches," and no, that is not the case. And finally, you will have to have some financials. Now, I always think financials are lies. I don't, you know, you're just projecting this. So, and it's a lie. You know it's a lie. But so you've got to work on it in such a way that you tend to understand what is involved, what kind of money is involved. And the best way to do that is start, you know, with a bottom up rather than a top down approach to your financials. Describe all the funds that you've raised and the ones that you need. Share your estimates, and just show a sort of a general how you plan to use the funds when you raise this money. You know, if you're going to give everyone thousands of dollars raises, then they're not really ready to invest in that. They want to see, but they do want to see how you're planning to spend your money. And finally, there are a few more points that you want to be sure and talk about. Not always is it necessary, but it pretty much is a given that there's going to be some risk, and you're going to want to show the mitigation to those risks. And you want to be either prepared to talk about that in the question and answers, or include it in your pitch, your actual pitch. You want investors to recognize that you cannot manage risk, but you identified it, and that you know it's there, and that you have a strategy for working on it. You can do a sort of a summary, everyone, you know, including some major points that you want to make, certainly. And this next one, thank you, is really important. I've seen many presentations and pitches where they just stop talking. And does that mean it's finished, or, you know, or were they thinking? Say thank you. Either have a slide that says thank you, or say thank you. And now I open it up for questions and answers. Again, you know, you've got to choreograph. You know, please try to remember this. You've got to choreograph your pitch, your presentation. Remember, you're telling the story. You're in charge of the stage, and if you're in charge of the stage, you choreograph. Who's going to speak? Where are you going to stand? Who's going to answer the questions? Or if there's a team up there of 3 people, and all 3 of you jump on one question, and then you challenge each other in front of the investors in answering the questions, then you don't look professional. So you choreograph everything that you're doing. And support slides. You know, you know, keep some slides in reserve for things that you feel like the investor might ask, and therefore you can turn to a slide that's separate from your actual pitch deck. And the number and content of these reserve slides is what you feel like is something that would support what you're trying to, the ideas that you're trying to put forth. So some of the questions that I've had is, so how many slides do I need, and how long should it be? Well, all of that, I can't tell you, because all of that depends upon, the allotted time that you're given. It depends upon the background of the investors. It depends upon your technology and the product. There's just so many components to putting together a pitch that it's hard for me to say how many slides you should have. But you do want to know, if they tell you 20 minutes, then by God, it better be 20 minutes. In competitions, we stop you. The buzzer goes off, or we just stop you. But in an investor pitch, they're not going to stop you. But if they're given 20 minutes and you go over 20 minutes, they won't appreciate that, and that doesn't look well and professional for you. And one last thing that I want to say that is really important to your pitch, and that is something that's not going to be in your deck. That's going to be you. That's going to be how you feel about what you're doing, your passion, your enthusiasm. If that doesn't come through, nobody's going to be interested in it. You've got to have this passion and enthusiasm. You have to show that you understand business and you understand product development. You've got to show that you are a strategic thinker, that you're willing to listen to people, and if they offer you advice, you're willing to accept that. And that doesn't mean that you make changes, but you're willing, in the face of public, in the public, you're willing to listen and receive advice. You want to demonstrate leadership characteristics, and what they're going to be doing is they're going to make sure that you're a culture fit to their organization, to their portfolio. So that has to come through, and that's where it goes back to, from the very beginning, I said, know your audience, know what your investors have invested in before, and know the kind of companies that they are interested in. And that final point on the slide, this is your show, so be in charge of the stage. So just a couple of points to kind of wrap up. And the reason I'm trying to wrap this up so that we have 15 minutes for questions. Mark Twain said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. Well, what's the takeaway? There is so much more power in a very succinct, focused message. You're not rambling. You're giving a very succinct message, and you know the direction that you're going in. You know what you need to say, and you're saying it. A quote from a VC life scientist, a life science VC that I ran across, that I've kept. And he says, leave general market stuff to generalists. Related to the first point, but warrants its own delineation. It's annoying when an entrepreneur touting a discovery stage cancer program has multiple slides on how big the market is for cancer drugs, what the sales of Avastin were last year, what the annual incidence of the big 4 cancers are, etc. He said, these slides give me a huge urge to reach for my phone. We know cancer is huge. Unless you've got a particular angle on the disease or market, then you're wasting their time. Leave it all out. One of the things that I am known to quote to my students is practice, practice, practice. And oh yeah, and did I say practice? And I don't mean memorize. And a quick story, I think I see I'm timing myself, so we have 15 minutes, so I see I have about a minute and a half. So I was watching a pitch, an excellent product, a great team, but it was clear to me anyway, the guy had memorized his pitch. Well, somewhere in the middle, someone walked in and the door slammed, or a book dropped, or some noise came up and interrupted him. It startled him. And what happened? Because he had memorized it, what he had to do was start all over. He couldn't pick up where he had been. And, I'm not saying that that's why he lost, but I'm saying that contributed, because he didn't show the professionalism. He tried to show that, okay, I don't know this stuff, so I'm going to memorize it. Well, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to practice it in such a way over and over that it just flows from your lips easily. And so I've enjoyed giving you this information. I would hope that you've gotten something from the information that I'm sharing. And I do want to extend one quick offer that I can't touch base with each of you, but I'm willing to listen or provide feedback on a business pitch that you might be making soon, and I'm happy to offer this feedback. So, but I can only do a few. So if you're interested, by all means, feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to give you some of my time and drop you a note and go over some things with you, or even if you have a video already, I'd be happy to look at it. So with that, I'm finished, and I hope that there are some questions that I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, we do have some. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was awesome. I think you did an awesome job about talking about how to bring stories into your pitch, and I think that's going to be kind of a secret weapon for a lot of these startups who are still kind of trying to perfect their presentations. So we do have a couple questions that came in that I'll read to you. You mentioned that you should know your audience. How do you recommend really getting to know your audience? And then kind of part two to that is how do you handle kind of a mixed audience?
Very good. And great questions. Great questions. How do you know your audience? Well, if you're going to a competition, it's very hard to know your audience because you don't know who your judges are. And unfortunately, some judges may know a lot and others may know little about your industry or your product that you're trying to sell. And so that's a guess. And that goes to that second one, but I'll go back to the first one. But that when it's like a competition or in an area where you really don't know the audience and there's no way of finding out who the audience is, then how do you handle that? By going right down the middle. And you cannot miss by speaking as if you're speaking, like I said earlier, to your grandmother. Share like you would be sharing to your grandmother, because if there are some more detailed information that someone wants, they will certainly ask you. I would much rather you not go, that you don't talk over the heads of half of your audience just so that you can reach the other half. And if you're a good speaker and you're prepared and you're making a very focused presentation and it's entertaining in a certain way and touches on a lot of information, even those that already know some of this, they'll go and they'll come up with questions. Don't worry, they will certainly come up with questions. Oh, then I was going to say, yes. Now, if you can know, how do you find out about your audience? Well, again, that depends. Are you going to really be making a pitch to a group of individuals? Well, you certainly can find out what, if these are investors of some kind or funders or people that you want connections with, you can find out who your audience is. Google is a great tool. And also because you're in library or associated with some libraries, that's also a very good place to find as much information as you can about individuals that you know would be in the audience. And if you even know by the way, some of the names of some judges or individuals who will be in the audience, learn who they are, learn what it is that they are looking for. Doesn't mean that you focus only on that individual or that small group if they are a small group within a large group. But again, the more you know about your audience, the better you can speak to them directly. Now, I didn't ask at the beginning of this pitch, of this webinar, how many of you are not in science. And perhaps I should have, but because we, the manner in which we're going about that, I was invited to give this webinar to a group of individuals that for the most part are in science. And so I didn't ask if anybody else was in something other than science, but I think it's appropriate if you look back and keep in mind it's uh, this information is appropriate to anyone. And but if I were giving a very specialized speech to a very specialized person group, I will very definitely understand who they are, what do they want from me, what can I give them, and how can I connect with them, what kind of stories, what kind of ways that are they interested in hearing, the way I, stories that I can share. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was great. I just want to open it up really quick to the room. Does anybody here in the room have any questions? Raise your hand if anyone's got anything burning. Yeah, go ahead.
So, exactly, kind of how long would your story last before you get into really the numbers and your projections in the pitch?
Well, remember, your whole pitch is your story. So the point that I would like for you to think about is that, yes, you're going to tell us about the story about the customer or yourself or whoever involved. You can tell about your company, and that's a part of the story. But even your facts and your graphs and your everything, the data that you want to present, that's part of the tools of the story. That's part of the in Toy Story, they had all of these, each of these characters had these little things that supported who they were, which character they were in the, in the whole story. It all just lends itself to in strengthening your own story. And I think it goes back to, how do you decide? You decide of what information and how you present it. Is this information that you're going to be presenting supporting what it is you're doing, and why is it supporting it, and does it enhance the story, or does it just really show that you kind of drifted off and away from a focused pitch? So not that you stop telling the story, it's always a story from the very beginning to the very end. It's a focused pitch that you tell it very much like a story. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we've got one more that came through online. What would your recommendation be for dealing with technical difficulties? Like if you have a video in your presentation that doesn't play or something like that, how do you recommend dealing with that? And maybe from your perspective, how does a judge see that? Since I know you've judged pitch competitions before.
Yeah, and I've seen, oh my gosh, it's heartbreaking, because I've seen where teams have depended upon the video or the technology that they're using. They've depended upon it, and that was a mistake. Um, you know, I have notes here, and I'm looking at my screen. Okay, let's assume that my notes fell and I don't have my notes in front of me. Well, I have my slides, so I know my this information well enough to just look at the slide and talk. Okay, but let's say the technology stopped and you didn't see my slides, or I didn't see my slides. Then I have my notes. And so the point being is that if you depend upon that one aspect or several, and I saw one, oh my gosh, it was just heartbreaking, because they were showing why this device was so important, because it had killed, because without it, someone had died. And they showed this video, and it was so impressive when we watched it time and time, as they were practicing. I saw the video, and oh my gosh, it was just, it was so impactful that you really wanted to listen to everything else of how they were going to solve this problem. The video didn't work. And it kind of, threw them for a loop, and they didn't know how to overcome it. And that was a real shame, because it was such a phenomenal product. And they were such good speakers, but they weren't prepared. They were not prepared to handle a technology issue like that. Don't depend upon the technology. It's so funny. When I have to go and give talks and stuff, I carry my computer, I carry my iPhone, I carry my iPad, I carry a USB, I carry anything and everything I can on different and in the cloud, so that if somewhere something, I can't use one, I can certainly find it somewhere else. And so it's just, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared that if the lights go out and there's no electricity and you're going to stand there and talk, are you going to not talk? well, this is your chance. You talk, and without your notes, without your slides, but you are prepared well enough to talk and tell your story. Okay, I hope that helped.
Yeah, I like that answer. I just sent you, if you can see in your chat box, we had a comment come through. Let me know if you can see that. I wanted you to read it and maybe decide whether or not you want to address that one. So let me know.
All right. I mean, let me read it out loud. And you know, I'm not sure that I can respond, but I'll be happy to look at it. The
Sure.
mission of
Yeah.
Theranos changed more than once. Boy, did it ever. And she, by the way, she was tried to be, the board had several times tried to fire her, and she talked her way out of it. But anyway, what she did was avoid life science VCs, recruiting board members with appropriate industry experience or hiring employees both. And yes, her biggest fans were people that had not ever invested in life science, which is why in this article that I was reading to you early on, it said here, this is an article from a VC to a VC, and it said, if you cannot use a crayon and explain this product to an 8-year-old, then you have no business investing in it. And that's, you know, that's true. Let's see, board members with appropriate industry experience or hiring employees both on the R&D side and the lab services side from the industry so that no one would challenge her. As a matter of fact, if you read the book, what it also shows is that she wouldn't let people inside her company talk to each other. And she would fire people who were doing that. So that there were not any way that anyone could challenge her. And when they did, they were fired immediately. Her CFO was fired immediately on the spot when he just said, I'm not sure that this is accurate. Can you tell me how you came up with that? And she turned to him, and it's in the book. She turned to him and said, you know what? This isn't going to work. You need to leave. And that meant you need to leave the business. Holmes was totally not coachable for those 15 years. I've tweeted several times about this fraud over the last 3 years. And I'm heartbroken by the whole story because back when I was teaching, she was an example. Oh my God, she was an example. But it started slowly coming out how she just manipulated the whole system and what she did. And now, of course, after the fact, unfortunately, and you know, there's still investors that still believe in her. They think it's a witch hunt. So what can we say? But yes, it's a good point, and I appreciate you saying that. And I hear you, and I'm on your right there with you. And by the way, for anyone who might be interested, again, the book is called Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. And the reason that I recommend it, it's not because you want to. It's a sad story. To me, it's a sad story because of the fraud. But there's a lot of insight into how not to be a good leader and what went wrong. And like you said, she, you know, that no one understood who she was and how she worked because no one challenged her. And when they did, they were out of there fast. And in the book, by the way, something kind of funny in the book, it does mention go to Glassdoor. Read what it said to what people said about her there when they were working there and they left, what they said in Glassdoor about working at that organization. The only way to make money is through fraud, you know, things like that. And nobody stopped it. Nobody picked up on it. So it's really a sad story to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for addressing that one. Looks like we're actually right on time to wrap it up. So if anybody has any burning questions still left, we do have Anita's contact information in the presentation, which you will get a copy of. So take a picture or we'll be sending it out. So don't worry.
So if I may say one last thing.
Sure.
I believe that it's very difficult to take the concept of story and put it into a scientific pitch. It's very difficult. But I think the idea is if you keep in mind what a story is, that the story has a string that goes all the way through, and everything that's presented the motivation behind the storyline, the conflict, the little pieces in the in the background. If you're watching a cartoon or watching a story, everything in that has something to do with that string that goes all the way through. And that's what you have to think about in terms of preparing yourself for giving a pitch, with the concept of tell a story, make it stick. And to make it stick is keeping it focused and keeping that thread running all the way through and everything connected to that thread. And that's all I can say.
Yeah, that's a great final note to remember. Well, thank you so much, everybody who joined us. And thank you, Anita, again, so much for such an awesome presentation. I'm sure you'll be hearing from some folks. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions.